Peter Bartlett, Minter Ellison, libel expert, former chairman of the company. Thank you very much for talking to Business Spectator today.
Happy to be here, James.
Now, one of the issues that I want to talk to you first about is about libel. It's a fascinating area, I'm sure, for the general public, not just for journalists and participants in the media. And one of the areas I expect that's changing is that where you can be libeled is changing. We have new social media, we have Twitter, we have the internet itself, we have Facebook, etc. Is libel shifting onto these platforms? Is the volume of libel shifting?
The vast majority, I think, would still be against traditional media and also in the other spaces that it's always been in. But we're seeing more and more in the social media space. The difficulty, of course, with social media is that a lot of people that are authoring this sort of material are not able to be identified, and that's a problem. But I think also a lot of people using social media are using it as if it's the telephone, not realising that it's actually there and there's a record, and that's a publication for defamation.
So is it possible
they can be sued.
Is it possible there's more libelous activity on these new mediums, but in the courts it's not reflected yet?
Oh, very much so. I think you see far more loose discussion going on in social media, but a lot of it isn't going into the courts because of the expense of litigation, and people, I think, treat social media in a different way to what they treat traditional media.
Is there more successful libel actions or less successful libel actions these days than, say, compared to 10 years ago?
I think probably less. I think probably there are less libel actions issued these days. I think we see far less from politicians. Now, of course, under the Uniform Act, companies can't sue. That's also had a significant impact.
Do companies seek to seek justice in any other fashion apart from if the libel area doesn't succeed for them? Are there other things that companies do when they are disappointed or angry?
Yes, there are. They can look at misleading and deceptive conduct under the what was the Trade Practices Act, but that has a media exemption. And there are other things they can seek to do. Of course, executives can still sue. So if you publish something that reflects adversely on a company, that company would not have acted in that way without the agreement, concurrence of the chief executive, maybe the CFO, the board, and others.
So is there a change in the pattern of executive suing? Are executives more often suing as individuals?
Very much so.
Right.
We see that now, reasonably common, that a chief executive would sue in circumstances where prior to 2005 it would have been the company.
Does the chief executive pay for the legal costs out of their own pocket?
Well, that depends very much on the policy of the company. Typically, I think probably the company would sue, would pay for those legal costs.
Right. Okay. So libel is changing in terms of who libels. Who seeks in the courts to seek justice in terms of feeling they have been libelled. The nature of the platform on which the libel take place is changing. Where will it be in 5 years' time?
I think it will go the same way. I think that still in 5 years' time, corporations, companies won't be able to sue for libel. I can't see that changing because it's in the uniform legislation and would take all of the states and territories' attorneys to agree. It was a lot easier, of course, when that act came in because they were all from the ALP.
The act being specifically the name of the act?
This is the Uniform Defamation Act. So that was passed in all of the states and territories and the Commonwealth. And to amend it uniformly would be very difficult.
Would be very difficult. Now, just one last thing on libel, which is something, as a journalist myself, all my life, we all have this nightmare that your house will be taken from you, that someone will libel you in your own name, they'll win and they'll take your home. Has it ever occurred in Australia?
I think it probably has. I'm not aware of specific details, but we all remember the stories about Bob Hawke getting a tennis court and swimming pool from various major media publishers as a plaintiff. But these days, if an individual is sued for libel, then even though there's a cap on damages of just over $300,000, the legal costs can be very, very significant. And so people could lose their house.
It's still a distinct possibility.
Very much so.
Now, talking about your broader career, you were the chairman here, of course, at Minter Ellison for many years. And in terms of the larger corporate activity around law firms in Australia, two very big changes coming through the system, it would seem. International companies, London-based companies coming in and buying local law firms. Similarly, local law firms seeking to engage, grow, perhaps merge in China, for instance. That has happened recently between Mallisons and King & Wood. What do you see happening here? Is this a rationalisation of legal firms? Do other legal firms arrive and grow and become independent operators?
Well, I think we're basically seeing something a little similar to what happened in the late 1980s in Australia. In the late 1980s, you got a lot of Sydney-Melbourne amalgamations. And then there were amalgamations of firms in the other states and territories of Australia. We're seeing that on a far broader scale now. I think you look at the world economy, and the US has had a difficult couple of years. The UK's had a difficult couple of years. Those legal firms in those countries see Australia doing very well. They see the minerals and resources boom. They want a share of it. So where they see future growth in the UK and US being a bit flat in coming years, they see our economy doing a lot better.
So independent Australian law firms are something of a merger targets, are they, at this time?
They're merger targets. And so a lot of those international firms, and there are many, many of these international firms with multiple offices in many, many different countries, then look and say, well, all of this work's going on in Australia. We want to be down there and get a part of it.
And your own, one last question, your own legal firm, Minter Ellison, where does it stand in this fray?
Well, that's of course an issue for our CEO and current chairman to talk about, but clearly this firm is looking at all of the developments, issues, all of the international firms coming here, and will make proper recommendations to the firm if they deem it appropriate.
Peter Bartlett, thanks very much for talking to Business Spectator.
Thanks, James.